Hi everyone. Today is Thursday, January the 20th, 2022. And today I want to review a very interesting book that is not only historical, kinda, but it reads like a work of fiction and a work of dramatic fiction, almost soap operatic, in the drama level and in the sort of screenplay element, if you will. This is a book that's called Our Crowd, and let me look up, I think it's by Stephen Birmingham. Yeah, the name of the book is Our Crowd, The Great Jewish Families of New York, and it's written by Stephen Birmingham. And I want to give a shout out to Maneko64, who actually recommended this book in one of his not live streams, I think one of his daily update videos. And he brought it up in the context of one particular character and that guy's involvement. And I mean, yeah, even in my language, in calling him one particular character, because this book almost reads like fiction. It's not fictional. This all real people with real family connections, and that still exists, that still have industries and firms in New York and all over the world, frankly. But the way the book is written and just the fun of the book almost sounds like you're reading a screenplay with various characters. And so Mario from the channel called Maneko64 mentioned this book and this one particular guy in the context of what's that first Federal Reserve guy's name? The J.P. Morgan, Pierpont Morgan, and that whole connection, because this guy had come to the States in the 1830s, during that sort of panic of 1837, etc. And he mentioned how he saw that connection a little bit later, and therefore he recommended the book. Well, I looked up the book, and it was free on Audible. I'm not sponsored by Audible, just so you'll know. But I'm just a regular customer of Audible. But I noticed that the book was actually free with my membership. So I didn't even have to pay for the book. So I didn't make many notes on it or anything. But because I listened to it sort of while house cleaning and that kind of thing, because it was just very fun to listen to. And if you're looking for a book that is not only informative and teaches you something about history, cultural history, a different sort of religious group, if you're not Jewish, or your same ancestry if you are Jewish. This book is a fantastic book. It's very entertaining also. Like it talks about the quirks of this. So it starts off in this kind of quirky-ish way of this this old lady who would repeat things 3 times, and she had like a lot of interesting quirks, and how she would be with her grandkids, etc. And also that's how then it evolves into, like, for this person there was our crowd, which was people we visit, and people we don't visit was not our crowd. And it kind of starts that way, and then it evolves. It goes like backwards and forwards in time. The reason I picked out this book and why I wanted to read it, I can take out my ID from here. Anyways, the reason I wanted to read it is because I actually had listened to a different book that I did make notes on by Rabbi Daniel Lapin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but Rabbi Lapin has this incredible book called Thou Shalt Prosper, 10 Commandments for Making Money. And his book, I listened to that book, The 10 Commandments for Making Money, that Thou Shalt Prosper. Sorry, the 10 Commandments was the subtitle. But I read Thou Shalt Prosper after reading the book about the Vatican Bank, which was called God's Bankers, because there were so many things in God's Bankers that made me like about the First World War. No, the First World War, the in-between period, the Holocaust, the Second World War, that whole time frame, that were kind of open questions for me, that I felt like I needed to understand Jewish culture a little bit more. And so that's the reason why. And I just chanced upon Rabbi Lapin and this interview that he did on YouTube, like over Zoom. I guess it was like a recorded Zoom meeting that was uploaded to YouTube. I will find that link actually, and I will put it in the description because it's a well worth listening to interview. And in his book, he had these 10 commandments basically that were incredibly interesting in terms of sort of what makes people successful, what makes people I'm sure many of you have noticed that like wealthy people give, and then the more they give the more they get. And sometimes if you're not in that space, you wonder, gee, like how's this happening? Or you think, oh, I will give when I have more, or that sort of thinking. But this book, it really puts down all the Talmudic principles. I'm talking right now about a different book than the one I'm actually reviewing. I'm talking about Thou Shalt Prosper. But this, and I have these 10 commandments written down here, such as change the changeable while steadfastly clinging to the unchangeable. Get to know yourself as others see you. Neither neglect the imperfect nor expend yourself on futile pursuits of perfection while failing to make the most of less perfect circumstances. Those kind of things. Know your money, a quantifiable analog for your life force, an aggregation of time, skills, experience, persistence, and relationships. Learn to foretell the future. Although these are his 10 commandments, basically, or his the points that he raises, Rabbi Lapin raises. And because I read that, I began to have a whole different appreciation for Jewish culture. And so when I heard about this book, Our Crowd, the one that I'm reviewing today, with an 8-minute long intro, my goodness. Okay, when I heard about this book, Our Crowd, the Great Jewish Families of New York, I was like, well, let me listen to this, and well, especially since it was free, because I am a cheap Indian after all. If something's free, of course I'll listen to it, because it's like, hey, why not, All right, so I listened to this book, and oh my goodness, I don't know if I should make notes on it, but I think if I find a copy that is like relatively inexpensive or used or something, I think I will buy this book, like a hard copy, because this book, it not only shows physical applications, or like real life examples of applications of the 10 Commandments of Thou Shalt Prosper, but it's also an invaluable Rolodex of everyone who is, quote unquote, important. I say quote unquote important because, of course, I think, the most important people are your family and your community. But there are those people that kind of, influence things from the back, from people that influence things invisibly. And I think it's a good thing to know who they are, what their last names are, what their own family history is, because this book, it it actually goes into sort of those, so and so married so and so, and then so and so married so and so, and that's how you realize, like, Neiman and Marcus were two different families. Macy's, the people who owned Macy's, the Kuhn Loeb and Company. Chef, my goodness, I didn't even know he was Jewish, first of all. But yeah, and it was so wild, like to hear all these last names that I've kind of just heard peripherally, and or like just even store names or bank names, Deutsche Bank. There was a guy by the last name Deutsch, and he was actually related to, what's his name, Otto Kahn, I think, maybe. Well, read the book and then you'll know for sure, or listen to the book. And yeah, Otto Kahn and Otto Kahn and Schiff, and their sort of, their role, or rather, maybe their hesitancy, or not their hesitancy, their terms that the British Allied Forces did not want to accept during the First World War, that then kind of increased anti-Semitism, which, you never think about things like this, but certain things that you hear about and read in story that are, from so long ago, they kind of give you a different perspective on things. And so I thought that was very interesting. This book has really shows sort of those societal and familial, genealogical connections, interconnections, marriage interconnections, and relationships, and personality types, which I thought was fascinating because, like this family, the Seligman family, the oldest brother. So it talks about sort of, he grew up in Bavaria, and his dad, I guess, was not. I guess his dad was not much of like an alpha, but his mom had maintained a store, and his mother used to like talk to him about money and trading. This boy, I think Joseph Seligman, the first Seligman, he kind of had like a forex exchange in his little village in Bavaria as like a 9 or 10-year-old boy. Because he would sell stuff and then he'd collect currencies from people, from travelers, different currencies, and then he'd trade them. And, and I was like, wow, that's freaking brilliant. And this is like in the early 1800s, I'm guessing. And then his mother had like socked away some coins, gold coins, of course, in her little, chest of drawers, and she gave it to him so that he could go off to study. And then again, she gave him some money so he could go over to New York. And then sort of his struggle about how, he brought one brother over, and they invested quite a bit in the railroad industry, which is something like I never knew. But again, that evolution of like from being a merchant to that trading to banking, and then becoming a bank, and then becoming like the funder of railroads and that kind of thing. It was just fascinating, that evolution. Then the kind of, well, I want to say political, but it's not political in the sense we look at it these days, but the sort of that kind of I guess professional politics that goes on, where you want a railroad or a company and then someone else wants it, and that kind of tussle over things, and sometimes the illogical decisions that people arrive at. That's also captured beautifully. That whole history between the Panic of 1837 to like the boom golden age or whatever, like was it 1895 or something. The Civil War, was it the Civil War in the late 1880s or 1870s or something. What was it, 1850s? Something like that. That whole thing, the thing between the North and the South, how that was funded, or rather, perhaps not funded, or funded strategically to affect the outcome of the Civil War. I thought that was fascinating. All these connections, and they all presented very, very dramatically. And the book goes very back and forth in its sort of, in the timeline. So it's not super chronological. For example, like there's a chapter on the Rothschilds, and it goes across like 40 years or like a couple generations, at least in that one chapter. But then there's a parallel chapter that goes, from 1866 to 1899, and there's all these like overlapping connections and things. So it's almost like this book could so easily be made into like a screenplay or a show that has these kind of time blocks, but then also has these parallel stories going along in that said time block. And I thought that really lent itself to the kind of very soap operatic nature of this book. For example, this what is it? What ballet companies is it? New York something? The New York Opera House. Sorry, I think it was the New York Opera House. Anyways, there's like a parallel thing going on between Otto Kahn's opera house setting up and the kind of philanthropic activities of his. And in conjunction to that, there's also quite a bit going on about the Russian Jews migrating to the United States. So there's just a lot of overlap and a lot of intrigue and a lot of description of family structures and family ties and the culture, the mindset, the thinking of the Jewish community that I found very, very interesting. One thing that I found fascinating from a sort of commodities trading perspective was many of you may know about the sort of Hunt brothers and the silver squeeze thing, or the cornering of the silver market. And I say cornering because I've almost reached the conclusion that if you're the right person, the right people are allowed to corner the market, let's just say, and they don't get into trouble for it because they do it the right way. But I will talk about that when I review this book called The Story of Silver by William Silber. In this book, the author talks about the poor man's metal, i.e. copper, and how during the electrification there was this sort of copper squeeze, cornering the copper market kind of a thing going on. And this is what's interesting, because I had heard about this this cornering of the copper market from sort of the regular circles of people who speak about commodities, Anglo views on this, right? And again, I'm saying Anglo because I've kind of begun to understand now that this whole cultural Jewish dynamic, it has not just the fact that these individuals, these families are Jewish, but it's deeper than that. It's German Jewish, Russian Jewish, British Christians thinking differently towards people who are Jewish, and the tension between that manifests itself in kind of banking agreements and in trade. Let's say not banking agreements, in trade, and by extension in finance. And I thought that was interesting. So I had heard from, therefore I should distinguish. I had heard from sort of more, I think in a book written by someone who is not Jewish, that these people, there were certain people who were trying to like corner the copper market. And I was like, hey, wait a second. I heard about that in this book, some drama about the poor man's medal. That's the name of the chapter. And I went back and I listened to it. And the light bulbs went off. Because apparently the point of view from the Jewish family that is accused of cornering the copper market, their point of view was they did not want this they did not want the interest to go, the controlling interest to go outside the family, because they're all about the family. I mean, to the extent that they were kind of, some folks were like marrying cousins and whatnot, so that things remain in the family, in our crowd, as the book name suggests. However, in doing so, the person they were actually messing with was the son-in-law of Aldrich, the Federal Reserve Act. He was the first guy who did it, and then that didn't work out, and then J.P. Morgan took it over, and then they went through with it. You should read the creature of Jekyll Island to really understand that whole intrigue, because that's fascinating too. But understanding that the person he was messing with was a Rockefeller, was connected with the Rockefellers, connected with Standard Oil, also connected with oil, plastic, big pharma, and Aldrich. And in a sense, it's kind of German Jews versus British Christians is the way I saw that kind of religio-cultural and national dynamic being played out in that chapter. And I understood this whole copper squeeze or copper cornering of the copper market phenomenon of the early 1900s, late 1895 to 1907, the Panic of 1907, all of that. So that was very, very interesting and revelatory for me to understand, because I think what it really taught me is, we have this prayer, right? Glory be to God, the glory be prayer, and the way it ends is, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end, amen. And it really made me think about how humans are the same pretty much wherever we go, in whatever time and whatever time and space and community we occupy. We have these deep behavioral kind of forces, and and how it gets interpreted by history is just fascinating. Because if you look back, and I don't know the truth of what happened, who knows? Maybe they were cornering the copper market. But reading it from this point of view, it seems like all they were trying to do was keep something in the family. But in doing so, they messed with the wrong person to mess with. And I think that's just fascinating. So there's a lot of beautiful gems like this in that book, and I highly, highly recommend it. I also highly recommend Thou Shalt Prosper, which I've not reviewed yet, but I will leave the interview link with Rabbi Lapin in the description box. And yeah, let me know what you think. Take care. Bye.
She worried about his tendency to overweight. Now eyed him as the dish was passed to him. But her maid Frances was on Missing Philip, you will not have the fish souffle, the souffle. She would set her Goodhart side. She always managed to slip a little on his plate. Her husband often used the Wall Street Journal as a screen at the dinner table and ate behind it. There were few ripples in the pattern of her life. Once her cook broke her leg, and Granny Goodhart took to nursing the poor woman, who was well on in years herself and had been in the family forever. Each night at table, Mrs. Goodhart would deliver a report on the broken leg's progress. One night her husband said sharply, "Damn it, Hattie, you mustn't sympathize with her or she'll never learn." Hattie Goodhart went right on sympathizing, of course, but stopped talking about it. There were occasional other unsettling experiences. She and her friends did not believe in making a point of being Jewish or of being anything, and sometimes this led to confusion. One of her Lehman sisters-in-law, a prominent Jewess like herself, was turned away from a hotel in the Adirondacks because, of all things, the hotel politely said it had a policy and did not accept Gentiles. Then there was the visit from the young California psychologist. He was connected with the Institute of Behavioral Sciences and had been conducting Rorschach tests with college students to determine their reactions to Adolf Hitler's anti-Jewish policies in Europe. Granny Goodhart met the young man in New York at the home of her daughter, Mrs. Frank Altschul. Everyone there was talking about what the young man was doing, and after dinner he offered to perform a few of his tests on the group. Granny took the Rorschach test and, to the astonishment of everybody,